Karl Anthony-Towns. Wow, what a nice name. He goes by Cat, by the way. This is Sports Guy Talking that you guys are watching and listening to. I am Dustin Tran, your host, as I am here today to talk about Karl Anthony-Towns, as there are trade rumors surrounding him. With the emergence of Anthony Edwards, it is clear that Karl Anthony-Towns will never become the franchise centerpiece of a championship contending team in Minnesota. The Timberwolves already have Rudy Gobert on their roster, so Karl Anthony-Towns is potentially looking at being the odd man out on the Timberwolves. Before I say anything else though, I want to present you guys with a topic question. So, here it is. Should the Timberwolves trade Karl Anthony-Towns? And that depends on what you feel like what the answer should be versus what the Timberwolves may eventually have to do. Now, if the Minnesota Timberwolves had never traded for Rudy Gobert about a year ago, obviously the answer to this question would be no, because Karl Anthony-Towns can be a great number 2 option on a championship contending team, maybe even a number 3 scoring option. And even if you don't believe championship contending team, he can certainly help out a playoff team in a major role. But with Rudy Gobert on the roster, it is clear that one of those two have got to go. And since the Minnesota Timberwolves decided to give up 4 first-round picks for Rudy Gobert, it's clear that Karl Anthony-Towns has to be the odd man out, because if the Minnesota Timberwolves are moving off Rudy Gobert after one season, it is clear that they are admitting that they screwed up big time trading for Rudy Gobert, and who knows how much they would get back in the deal, because the value of Rudy Gobert has never been lower than it is right now. As for Karl Anthony-Towns, he's still a really good player. He's still an all-star caliber kind of player. No, he's not the kind of player that has changed the game of basketball like what Karl Anthony-Towns is believed, but Karl Anthony-Towns is still a good player. But Karl Anthony-Towns, on the other hand, is not a superstar in the making. At this point in stage of his career, we know what Karl Anthony-Towns is. We know that Karl Anthony-Towns is a top 5 center in the NBA, but we do know that Karl Anthony-Towns is not on the same tier as a Nikola Jokic. He's not on the same tier as Anthony Davis. He's not on the same tier as some of these other superstar big men. He's a star player, but not a superstar. He's in that Damian Lillard tier where he's a really good player, but he's not going to be this great player that changes the lives of everyone out there just by his mere presence. Karl Anthony-Towns has to go to a team where a team sucks and they need to be relevant. That's what Karl Anthony-Towns is really good at. Karl Anthony-Towns is great at making poor teams look relevant. Karl Anthony-Towns is not the kind of player where if you're one piece away from a championship contending team, he's going to elevate you into championship favorites. Karl Anthony-Towns is not that kind of player. He's never going to be that kind of player. And there's nothing wrong with that. Not everybody is meant to be like that. But Karl Anthony-Towns is still a really good player. He can impact the game on both ends of the floor. He can score in the post really well. He can shoot the 3 ball. I mean, he's not great at it, but for a center, he's not bad at it. He's certainly a threat to shoot the 3 ball, and he can space the floor really well. He's a decent defender. I'm not going to say he's a fantastic defender, because he's not going to be that guy that can take over a game like a Joel Embiid, but he can be a solid defender where he's not going to necessarily mess things up on the defensive end of the floor as long as he's playing in his position. But it's clear that Karl Anthony-Towns is not suited to be a power forward, with the power forward position supposing to be a tweener position for small forwards and power forwards, basically wings that can shoot the 3 ball but can also guard big men. It is clear that Karl Anthony-Towns is not a wing caliber kind of player. He is a big man kind of player. Now, if we were playing the 1990s, sure, Karl Anthony-Towns could be a power forward, but Karl Anthony-Towns in today's league is clearly a center, and him playing power forward is definitely the wrong position for him to be playing with. Karl Anthony-Towns needs to get traded from the Minnesota Timberwolves if he wants to fulfill his full potential and also fulfill the potential of the Minnesota Timberwolves, because even though they screwed up pretty bad with the Rudy Gobert trade, they're still a pretty solid team. And one team that I think that should trade for Karl Anthony-Towns should be the Houston Rockets. I know some people might be loving him going to the New York Knicks or the Boston Celtics or the Portland Trail Blazers even, but I think the Houston Rockets have got to be major contenders for landing Karl Anthony-Towns. Why do I say the Houston Rockets? Because the Houston Rockets are looking to make a splash in free agency and to become relevant this offseason. They've been horrible the last 3 years. It's pretty clear that ownership and management, they want to field a competitive team as soon as possible. That's why they hired Ime Udoka. You didn't hire Ime Udoka to continue rebuilding. You hired Ime Udoka so you would become relevant in the NBA once again, and Karl Anthony-Towns can do that. Like I said earlier, Karl Anthony-Towns is a good player if you're looking for relevancy. If you want to elevate a bad team, Karl Anthony-Towns is your man. If you put the Houston Rockets in position to get Karl Anthony-Towns, the Houston Rockets could certainly make noise in the Western Conference, and they could be playoff contenders as soon as year 1, assuming the fact that the Houston Rockets would be able to add some other free agents around him, or possibly even add another star around him. I mean, could you imagine a Rockets lineup involving Amen Thompson, and then you got the Şengün guy playing power forward, and then you got Karl Anthony-Towns at the center position, and then you managed to sign James Harden in free free agency, getting reunited with the city of Houston, and then you added Kevin Porter Jr. into the starting lineup. That would be an interesting starting lineup in the Western Conference. I'm not saying that team would become title favorites whatsoever, but if you put that team for the Houston Rockets, that would be a team worth watching for most people in the city of Houston, and they might be competitive sooner rather than later, combined with the coaching of Ime Udoka, because we all know that Ime Udoka is a great head coach and that he was screwed over with the situation in Boston. Sure, Ime Udoka screwed up with cheating on his longtime girlfriend, but the Boston Celtics at the same time, you could also say that they overreacted because they have been blurring out some details about the Ime Udoka situation as well. I mean, who knows what exactly happened? It's a he said, she said kind of thing. I'm not going to dive too much into that, but the fact of the matter is this: Ime Udoka is the head coach of the Houston Rockets, and he's looking to win now in Houston. And what is a better move than trading for Karl Anthony-Towns to be the Houston Rockets? Because you get bigger, you get better rebounding, you can score in the post. He gives you more options on the offensive end of the floor. Karl Anthony-Towns is a pretty good player. He's not this legendary player, but he's a guy that can definitely get the job done for the Houston Rockets. Now, if you're the Minnesota Timberwolves, you obviously got to trade Karl Anthony-Towns because he's not going to be a fit next to Rudy Gobert. Rudy Gobert needs to play the center position full time because Rudy Gobert is not a shooter. He can't shoot from the mid-range. He can't shoot from the three-point line. He can't even shoot his free throws. He can only score from 3 feet and under. Rudy Gobert has no offensive game whatsoever other than catching lobs, catching dunks, and being able to set screens. That's all Rudy Gobert can do on the offensive end of the floor. And Rudy Gobert is a glorified rim protector. Rudy Gobert has got to be one of the most overrated centers in the NBA. Is Rudy Gobert a good defender? Absolutely. But Rudy Gobert is not this game changer that is going to save the lives of every franchise out there. Rudy Gobert is supposed to be a complementary piece on a championship contending team. But what's done is done. The Minnesota Timberwolves, they know they messed up, and now they got to figure out how to make moves around that mistake. So if you can net some decent pieces for Karl Anthony-Towns in return, that trade would absolutely be worth it if you're the Minnesota Timberwolves, because even though they screwed up the Rudy Gobert trade pretty bad, they were still a playoff team. So if they can manage to dump Karl Anthony-Towns and get some decent pieces in return, that would certainly help out the Minnesota Timberwolves in terms of staying competitive in the Western Conference. Let's say if they trade him to the Houston Rockets and they get something like Jalen Green, Jabari Smith, and a 2024 Rockets lottery protected first-round pick, something along those lines. That would be a pretty good deal for both sides. Like I've said, for the Houston Rockets, they would be able to field a competitive team sooner rather than later. They can also sell tickets in the city of Houston and draw interest for people to watch the Rockets again, unlike what happened in the Steven Silas era. And if you're the Minnesota Timberwolves, you get depth and you get guys that support the play style of Anthony Edwards, because Anthony Edwards is certainly a really good player. He's underrated and he's a star in the making. When you talk about making this trade, this is going to set the Timberwolves starting lineup as this. That's going to put them a starting lineup of Anthony Edwards, Jabari Smith Jr., Rudy Gobert, Jalen Green, and Mike Conley. Obviously, that lineup is not championship caliber, but that's a team that can be a top 6 team in the Western Conference, because that team has a lot of athleticism. They got guys that can shoot the basketball. They got guys that can get rebounds, and they got guys that know what they're doing. They got a solid group of veterans mixed in with young guys, so that starting lineup will be solid. The thing with the Minnesota Timberwolves is that they would have to sign some decent veteran players off the bench, because obviously that starting lineup is not enough to get the job done in the Western Conference. The Western Conference is just too deep for the Minnesota Timberwolves to just roll out a solid starting 5 unit. But honestly, that sounds a lot better than plugging in Anthony Edwards, Karl Anthony-Towns, Rudy Gobert, Mike Conley, and whoever else you can find, because the Minnesota Timberwolves are not a deep team whatsoever. They destroyed all of their depth with the trade for Rudy Gobert. Now they got to figure out how to recover from that, because obviously that was a horrible trade for the Minnesota Timberwolves. But now that you made that horrible mistake, now you need to go ahead and try to correct that mistake as much as possible, even if that means trading an all-star caliber player in Karl Anthony-Towns. Even though Karl Anthony-Towns is a good player, he's not going to save the life of the Minnesota Timberwolves in terms of contending for championships. So that means they need to use him as a trade piece where they can get as much depth as possible in return, just so they can fix some mistakes that they made from the Rudy Gobert trade. Just to be clear though, even if they trade Karl Anthony-Towns for a lot of picks, that's still not going to negate the mistake that the Minnesota Timberwolves made trading for Rudy Gobert. But now that the mistake has been made, now they got to go ahead and fix it. Fixing it means that they got to get Karl Anthony-Towns out of the Minnesota Timberwolves. It's that simple. So that is why the Timberwolves should absolutely trade Karl Anthony-Towns, as it would be best for both parties to move on from each other. Remember, go ahead and subscribe to Sports Guy Talking, like the video, and please comment down below. If you guys do that, I may shout you guys out in my Instagram story every Monday. That'll be for the @Dustin Tran Instagram account. Make sure to follow me on Instagram at Dustin Tran and at Sports Guy Talking. Also, go follow me on Twitter at Dustin Tran. Again, go ahead and do those things that I just told you guys to go do. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed the content that was just produced. Peace out. I hope you enjoyed that video. Want more Sports Guy Talking, the home of great sports content? Make sure you click that subscribe button to get the latest from Sports Guy Talking. Go ahead and like the video, comment down below, check the description box on the video in order to follow my Instagram and Twitter. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from the YouTube channel, Sports Guy Talking.